In Tragedy, a true crime podcast, we discuss missing persons cases, violent crime, and other sensitive topics that may be difficult for some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Our show is a place where every story matters and every voice deserves to be heard. To support this podcast, you can subscribe at www.tragedyaTrueCrimePodcast.com for early access to new episodes. And join our Facebook community, Tragedy, a True Crime Podcast, for updates, discussions, and ways to support the families we feature. Welcome to Tragedy, a True Crime Podcast. I'm Elisa.
And I'm Michael.
Today, we're joined by someone bringing a fresh, investigative lens to a case that has carried unanswered questions for decades. Steve Gelinske, a private investigator currently working on the disappearance of Deanna Merryfield, joins us to discuss the complexities of revisiting a case that began in the early 90s when Deanna disappeared from Killeen, Texas. In this conversation, we'll talk about what it means to take on a long-term missing persons case, the challenges of investigating after so many years, and the areas of this case that continue to raise questions. Steve will share insights into the investigative process, what details matter most in cold and missing persons cases, and why continuing to seek answers for Deanna remains so important. Cases like Deanna's remind us that time does not lessen the need for truth. Behind every file is a person, a family, and a loved one still searching for answers. Steve, thank you for joining us and for the work you're doing to help bring renewed attention to Deanna's story, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Elisa. Thanks, Michael. I appreciate you having me on.
And before we get into Deanna's case, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and what drew you to investigative work?
Absolutely. So most of my professional, career and experience has been in, large corporate environment. Started in technology, eventually, worked into an area of security, cybersecurity, and it's been most of the time working in that space with an intention of, at some point, being able to lever those skills and be able to, bring that outside of the corporate environment. So I had planned that for some time and was fortunate enough to be able to, kind of get out of that environment early enough. Start up an investigation agency and really get a sense of the landscape and, how much to focus on the missing persons space. And really through that process, decided that has to be the sole focus. There's just so much need in that space and so much need to specialize and to be able to go really deep to be effective with it.
I really like that connection. Michael was in cybersecurity for a very long time. And I don't know, did you ever think about using those skills to go into investigative work?
I haven't. And so I think this interview is going to, probably encourage me to, Steve, call you offline and figure out how you made that transition. Because I was the director of cybersecurity for a company for quite some time. And so it's something I'm super familiar with, both at the system administrative level as well as the network level.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Would very much look forward to it. And, one thing that I found with that, still connected with a lot of former colleagues who, and some of them who volunteer their time, have a passion in this space as well. I think part of it is just the structure of that, particular discipline, but also the mindset of being able to get in, solve problems, take it apart piece by piece, the systems thinking, and then, being able to bring that together. In this case with Deanna's, it's 36 years old, almost 36 years old, and be able to, look at the entire timeline of it while also bringing new capabilities, new technologies, new connections that we can see now that were not available at that time. And I think that's really, part of what drives a lot of people to get involved in this space as well and bring those skills in.
It's interesting you said that too, because one of the things that even my new job, a newish job, I shouldn't call it a new job anymore. I'm a data architect. And so I've had to really hone my skills on, data analytics, data architecture, obviously. And then it's actually led to me to build a number of, AI agents that helps us with our investigations with this podcast. And so I've been bringing this together without realizing I've been bringing it together over the last year. So it's been fascinating. It's also been really, really helpful for what we're trying to do.
I'll bet that makes a lot of sense.
As we have been on this journey and we've talked to several different people in different spaces, but related to true crime and crime, something that frequently happens to us is we'll talk to somebody, like we talk to some dive organizations who search for missing vehicles, and we're always like, oh, why wasn't that that wasn't my career? I wanted that to be my career. But now I'm seeing the connection that you're discussing, that you actually already have, Michael, a skill set, and maybe like that the big ooh can actually happen this time for us, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, the comment that she's not saying is there's been a number of times where we're having these conversations, and at the end of it, I go, wow, I want to kill my guidance counselor. Because I probably would have made a few choices differently.
Absolutely. Well, the nice
100%.
thing is you're here now. You guys have both gone down a very, interesting area that helps from a different angle, and lots of other doors you can open through this as well. So I think that's fantastic that you've taken that step as well and put yourself there.
Yeah, we've taken the initiative to do this. So this sounds great. Thank you for sharing all that and a little bit about your background. So tell us about your journey with Deanna's case. What made you decide first just to get started with supporting her case and her family?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Elisa, my initial engagement was through a local law firm and private investigation agency that had taken on the case on a pro bono basis and asked me to join the team as an advisor, as a collaborator on it. And so I did. I was interested in it. I did. And probably about month and a half into it, it became pretty clear to me that it was going to be more effective for me to just kind of take the lead on it, be able to drive it. And that wasn't a reflection of really high quality people that were involved on the other side. It's just a lot of times larger firms that have good intentions of getting involved on a pro bono basis have other priorities, cases that are for profit that kind of take the attention away from it. So again, it was happy to get involved initially that way, and then really glad this point almost a year later to have decided to just really take it on and lead with it and collaborate with some of the other nonprofits that I'm involved with, Private Investigations for the Missing being one of the key ones as well.
So when you're approaching a case that's been unsolved for decades and you're coming to this case with a fresh set of eyes, where do you even begin?
No, it's a great question. The most logical answer to that is, collecting everything that is available from, the case file, if you're fortunate enough to be able to get your hands on that, all of the information, just really assembling that and doing a thorough case review. And in this case, particularly, with Deanna, we have very fortunate circumstance. We've got a great partner within the Killeen Police Department, the detective that has been putting his time into it, volunteering and collaborating as well. So the dynamics are, very, very positive and set the stage for being able to, have a comprehensive look at, historically what's happened, have dialogue and really, Lisa, build go all the way back, review everything and start to build out, kind of the paths for the various theories while looking at, any kind of open items that weren't addressed, any leads that maybe weren't pursued as far as they could have been at the time, that we can now take a step further, again, given new insights, connections, technology, and the ability to do deeper research, and then kind of reassembling it with a new structure, a new baseline, new strategy, and then really executing on that with all of the players. So it's kind of going back to the basics of all the way back, reviewing it and then putting it together and creating a new plan that we can execute on and really have a strong bias for action around as well, to make sure that we're progressing and prioritizing our time on some of the most critical leads and tasks in the process of collecting intelligence and analyzing it.
So I have a question about how this functionally looks. And so I know it doesn't look like this, but I see like 3x5 cards with strings and pictures, and I know that's not how it looks like. So when you're talking about building the case, what does it look like to you? Like, it's not 3x5 cards and strings. How do you do it?
Well, you're not far off. I mean, it certainly could be 3x5 cards and strings, depending upon the scope. Because you're really in the example you provided, that might be feasible for a case with the right scope where you could actually fit all of those entities on cards on a board with the strings. Fortunately, we have some better tools now that we're able to take that concept and bring that into a digital environment and use those tools to create the connections and make all of that information much more discoverable, so that we can have kind of the underlying data set, but then be able to really look at the picture, look at the connections, look at the pieces that you might normally miss with the naked eye with 3x5 cards, and strings attached with it. And again, that's been a major area where advancements have occurred in that intelligence collection, specifically the analysis and kind of collating that information so that you can then turn around and act on those observations of those connections.
Yeah, see, this is where my tech expert over here is probably like looking at me going, I know what this looks like. I work really well with the pattern or like something to function with. So that's why I was like, how do you work that out? So thank you for sharing that with me. That's super, super helpful.
Oh, absolutely.
So as you're putting these pieces together, what have been some high points in your investigation in trying to find out what happened to Deanna?
I would say probably the highest points have been seeing how much people are coming together, seeing the advocacy of, her sister, Melissa, her other family members. I'm not mentioning their names because I don't know that we have their permission to necessarily mention the others. I know Melissa's very active and I believe you spoke with her as well, but just to see the advocacy of the family, to see how much they're showing up, how engaged they are, and really bringing the energy to it. So I'd say that's part of the one highlight. The other is, I'd say, the optimism around seeing what has happened over the last 12 months. And really, I believe this to be true. I believe that there's been more progress in the last 12 months than there probably had been in the previous, say, 34 years. And again, a lot of that, to mapping back to the engagement with the lead detective that's involved with this, renewed passion to get out there and uncover names, uncover connections, and bring that together to start to look for potential, supporting kind of substrates on those theories that we can then go in, further analyze, further work, do as many additional cycles we need for collecting that intelligence and analyzing it. So long-winded answer, but I would say it's the overall energy, the progress over the last 12 months, and really feeling like we're at a spot right now where we're going to continue to very aggressively make contact with any of those parties that may have been in the ecosystem and kind of the orbit that were, for whatever reason previously, had not been interviewed, had not been anywhere engaged in terms of providing details. So I'm really heartened by that. And I believe that we're going to see some positive results coming out of that.
Is part of that process you're going through, do you kind of look at the case file and then, try to identify areas that may have been under investigated or not considered?
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael, as part of that, really looking at, it's getting in and looking at every aspect of the case file, what's known, what we can clearly, kind of trace through and not find, an answer in terms of whatever happened with a specific action for a follow-up. And the answer may be out there, but being able to get in and really dig into that and then just, create the plan, if you will, based off of where we need to go deeper. And of course, part of the art with that science is figuring out, where we can maximize and execute as much of it in parallel as possible. So we're not single threading it. And again, that's where I feel like, part of the different approach now is having having really good partnership so that we can collaborate and parallel process across a number of these, call it a thread for lack of a better word, and really be able to track that down, move faster, move aggressively. And if we kick up some new intelligence on that, be able to act on it before some of that gets stale again.
Are you able to expand a little bit on some of the areas that you think may have been overlooked?
At this time, given that it is, an active case again, that's probably not an area that we want to go very deep into at this point in terms of granular level of detail. What I will say though, Elisa, on that note, we know that Deanna was last seen July 22nd, 1990, in the early hours of the morning, around 3:00 in the morning. And we, have multiple eyewitnesses that saw her last. So we have, a general description of who she was seen leaving with, general description of the vehicle. And I believe that there is a lot of opportunity to get in there at that kind of that core of the incident and look a little broader in terms of what was happening around that area prior, 24 or 72 hours and afterwards, and friends, neighbors, even, the parties that were present, being able to get in and really see what we can identify for information that had not been previously, surfaced with some of the interviews. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that is, a key area that, had been looked at before, but we know we definitely need to are going back, and we're visiting all of that very aggressively.
What really stood out to me there is that you talked about this last sighting, but what you really said is going before that, like what happened in the 48 hours and 24 hours before she was last seen, which I think is kind of an interesting and unique way to look at it. At least it's not a way I have thought about it. I always think about, like, we had talked with Doug McGregor, right? The geoprofiler. I think it was him that said, when the event happens, that's when you start, thinking and investigating. And you're talking about going backwards from there a little bit, maybe to try to build, I don't know if the right word is story or profile, of the general description of the people and the vehicle, and can those pieces of the puzzle be backtracked? I think that's what you're getting at, which I think is really interesting. You said it
well, and just to add a little more onto that, you're absolutely correct. To add a little more onto that, it's, it is backing up and it is broadening out to get a better understanding of actors. Who are the actors that were, sometimes call it the ecosystem or the orbit or the universe, that anybody that had interactions or knowledge of that environment at that time, any of those insights are going to be critical for helping us put together, better assessments of, and ultimately identification of, who were the actors that were then present at the moment of, and backing up and understanding also what was happening, with family dynamics, friends, environments in Killeen. We know that obviously it's military base town, and being able to, again, look at everything leading up to that within a certain range of time. I think it's a critical part of us being able to have a clearer lens as we start to look at what we thought we knew before.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because one of the things that I've always found fascinating when we talk to investigators is, just to kind of add to what you were saying, is, a lot of investigators have talked about that when the event happens, that's not the beginning. Mm-hmm. That's, in some cases, that's almost the end of what we know. And that, the investigation of what happened to several weeks to even to sometimes several months prior to the event become very important.
And also, bearing in mind that this was 1990, and, in many cases we don't, it's a cold case. It's 1990. We don't have a lot of, if we were to look at something, in the last 5 years, and we're able to go back, there's a lot more, signal intelligence and kind of digital footprint that we'd have access to now. So going back to 1990, having to really do a lot more, research in terms of the link analysis between who knew who, when, how they knew them, what those relationships were like, and kind of the subdynamics on all of those levels. And it kind of goes back to, Lisa, your point about the note cards and the strings. I mean, it is really a digital version of that, of looking for the metadata that's connecting it. What is something that by itself may seem insignificant, may not seem like it's worth probing deeper on, but once we've got that metadata captured and 5 other pieces of information of how subjects or addresses or locations or events or all of those at the time were happening, we may see patterns that are going to help us make observations that we can then act on. So I think it's all very critical. The big question is like how far, it gets down to a level of practicality of how far can you go back and spend that time, and then, what level of detail are you able to drop into? But it's definitely part of the strategy that we're using with this. I'm sorry, Michael, you're going to say?
Yeah, well, you said metadata, so now you've got my attention again, because I work with metadata all day long. But yeah, something that we very often get into conversations about with people is, especially when we talk about these cold cases, even something as simple as, let's say, phone pings. We very often talk about, number one, don't believe everything you see in the movies, that cellular phone pings, even today, are not incredibly accurate. You can't pinpoint an exact location. You can, triangulate a position. But then you go back to the 90s. Well, not everyone carried around a cell phone all the time. And so having that level of trackability is just not there. And then you go even further back. We had a case where we were talking about, well, they had a bag phone. Well, if you know anything about a bag phone, number one, most people didn't carry it around. They usually left it in the car. And number two, they only turned it on where they're actively using it and then turned it off. It's not how we use our cell phones today. And so the type of data and tracking capabilities of that is just very different than what's available today.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And if you even extend that thinking into the, DMV records and, the, LPR data or the license plate, reader data, and just the technology that was kind of on the cusp of coming into being in 1990, including, cell phones before they turned ubiquitous. So it's a whole different, level of information. And again, that metadata isn't something hanging out there in a database that we can, pluck off a cell phone ping, to your point. It's more going to come through the discovery of, again, analyzing those links between entities, between addresses, between events, digging deeper, having more conversations, and then, using the tools to actually aggregate those with the analysis. So it's, pretty big hybrid on that going back further. And to your point, if we're talking about 2026 and we had the luxury of, cell phone data coupled with, a GPS data at the moment of ping, that could be very precise, along with, triangulation. So yeah, it is definitely a different game going back that far, but we're adjusting course and using the, tools, techniques, and procedures that we have now to look at the data and events that happened then, and bringing that forward for analysis.
Oh yeah, I mean, not this is a joke, of course, I'm going to say, but back in the 80s and 90s, the only people that seem to be able to track anyone accurately is the student loan people.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
they seem to have no problem finding us. But that was, unless you had a student loan, good luck.
You say that, and the now you bring back memories, given my age. That and the I forget the name of it, but back when you used to get your music on cassette tapes, and you'd order it, and they would sign you. You'd get everything for free, and then you'd get a bill in the mail, and end up owning a couple $100 for your music membership, right?
Well, that was Columbia. Wasn't it?
There you go. Yeah,
I probably still owe money to Columbia. It's possible.
Careful,
I was thinking the IRS.
They might track you down with this additional metadata now. You might be in their database.
So without sharing anything sensitive to the investigation, what aspects of Deanna's disappearance continue to stand out to you?
Thinking in terms of the, where we've got some of the borders on what we can discuss. What I would say, Elisa, is, and I think, multiple family members agree with this statement, and the detective agrees with it. And, we've had many conversations, just given what we know about her personality, at that time, how unlikely it would have been for her to get into a vehicle with a complete stranger with her own free will. So given that we know at least through the, multiple eyewitness observations and testimony on that she, showed up at, her twin sister's, the trailer house that her twin sister was staying at, knocked on the window, and, was seen leaving with these two guys, was, effectively told to go home. It's 3:00 in the morning. I think that is definitely something we find curious that will inform the parties that we're looking at, the theories that support, what would line up with that type of behavior pattern as far as her comfort of getting into a vehicle, showing up in a vehicle, obviously with these individuals. Again, that's making some assumptions that is under her own free will, but so far the information that we have supports that. So I think that clearly, back to your question, is something that stands out, that's significant. We won't preclude other theories that there could, very possible that she could have been, gotten into a vehicle against her free will. But from a probability perspective, I think we're, definitely leaning in the direction of the logic of, kind of her behavioral pattern at that time.
And can you remind us, is it known if she got into this vehicle near that trailer or if she walked off and then was seen by someone else getting into a vehicle?
What I can share with you right now is, we do know that she got into the vehicle by the trailer house, with the subjects that she arrived with. What we don't know, and we don't want to rule out that was the only encounter with somebody in a vehicle, that evening or hours surrounding that, prior or after it. So that if those pieces, remain unanswered, and that those are part of the investigation. But we do know, and it is, public per, the observations that were made, the interviews, that, she showed up at the house that night, knocked on the window and left with the subjects that she arrived with.
Something that you've kind of been talking about throughout this is the importance of the behavioral aspect of this. And we do a really great job, I think, of asking those questions when we're supporting our families, when someone is missing or there's an unsolved murder. So that really resonates with me. I think what is helping me to move my thinking along is what you talked about, with not just looking at the behavior aspect of the person, but you use the word orbit. What's going on around, like what's happening in the community at that time. And this conversation is really helping me to have some different perspective and some different things to look at as we're supporting our families. Like, I'm thinking specifically with Michael's uncle. I don't know that I've ever asked, like, what was happening in the community? Was there anything odd or unusual happening in the community in the month leading up to his murder? Like, I don't think I've ever asked that question. We know we've said, did he demonstrate any unusual or odd behavior? But I don't know that we brought in the scope outside of the person. So I just want to thank you for opening my eyes specifically to those kinds of ideas.
No, absolutely. And I think, again, you said it very well. It's, it's really the dynamics surrounding that event, right? So we want to understand as much as we can, especially, for bringing it down to, we know actors are involved, people, as actors, potentially bad actors, potentially foul play. So as we take a broader look at as much as we can of what was happening, who was involved in that, family dynamics, environmentally around that area, we run a much higher probability of being able to find something that will inform that.
Can you talk specifically about some of the biggest obstacles when we're approaching a case that is 20, 30, 40 years old?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that normally one of the primary obstacles is just being able to, Michael had asked the question, I think, early on of how do you, pull all of that together? How do you structure it? Perhaps you asked part of that as well. In a lot of cases, and I think you two probably know this from, your exposure on other cases, in many situations, families or the, private investigators working with them are not able to access that information, or in many cases, even, the police departments may, records get moved around, they get shuffled, information gets lost. So to the extent that that kind of degrades or compromises the overall information set that you're working with, it's pretty hard to do an exhaustive case review if you don't have access to that information. And then, of course, as decades pass and, the subjects and the context that were interviewed and all of that information stales, being able to go back and, do the analysis on that, be able to do the, contact the individuals, all of that to the extent that we can have, great cooperation across all parties, law enforcement, family, private investigators working together. That's where we have the best opportunity. Unfortunately, in many, many cases, there are, procedural, blocks on that from police departments or at a state level in terms of what records get released and what we can have access to. But I do see progress being made on that front. And I do believe that, the missing persons units or the police departments that have people focused on missing persons unit, because in this case, a lot of those police departments, especially smaller ones, don't have the resources. They don't have missing persons unit dedicated. They certainly don't have a cold case unit, but they have, cold cases that are stacking up and, need assistance with that. And, that's where I'm hopeful that we can, in addition to making great progress and finding answers for Deanna's case, I think there's also, we have to constantly be looking at how can we, partner together to drive some change on that procedural side of it. So we kind of get to that point where it's, the tide rises all ships with it. So we're not doing this just one serial, case after another. And I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic with the players that I've engaged, the partners in this, and I think I think that's what's going to help us be successful with this in the long run.
One thing I'm curious about is, as you're going through this investigation and it's active with you now, what is your cadence when it comes to speaking to the family? What does that look like?
It's frequent. It's it's really, to be specific with it, multiple times per week, in the phase that we're in right now. And a lot of that is, phase dependent as we're looking at, case review and uncovering details and being able to have that kind of live flow of information. And anything we can do to, kind of keep additional time from passing in between those just allows us to move a lot faster. Now, of course, that's, that answer is going to be totally dependent upon resource availability, on any cold case as far as who's working with it, the resources that they have available. In this particular case, I'm fortunate enough to be able to, make the decision to dedicate, a very serious amount of resources to it, focus on it, and, drawing on other partners and some of the nonprofits that I work with as well, for, collaboration and just moving things forward as fast as we can.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because one of the things that we see it's really challenging is it's very common whenever we pick up a new case ourselves, right, and we start, kind of, developing the story. And one of the very first things that we typically find, unfortunately, is law enforcement's not talking to these families. And so that's usually one of the first things that we try to kickstart. And the way we do that is we call the family and said, you have to stop putting up with this. You have to be noisy. You have to rock the boat. You've got to walk in, because the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and they're not possibly going to care about your loved one more than you do. And that usually works. And it's just, I don't know. To me, it's unfortunate that's not more procedural.
No, I totally agree. I think that's sage advice. And that's, unfortunately what I've seen as well. Again, it's one of those things where it's understandable when you look at the resource constraints or the resource limitations. But to your point, differentiating, I can understand it logically, but it's hard to justify it and hard to feel good about it when, ultimately that's leading to cases getting colder, families not getting answers, things getting pushed out. So I think that's sage advice. And I think that also, those actions and as, more people are able to do that, I think that puts the pressures, where they need to be politically to ensure that it's a priority, from chief, deputy chief on down in the command structure, and helping them prioritize resourcing decisions. So again, optimistic, but I think that, practically taking the steps that you mentioned are absolutely important at the beginning.
So I have a two-parter that is related to public engagement. So what kind of information could still make a difference in Deanna's case today? And what would you say to someone listening who might know something but has never spoken up?
Yeah. So on part one, it's really anything. I would say there's nothing that's too small that if it's, friend, relative, or somebody that wasn't a friend or relative, but in that environment or knew somebody in that environment, in this case, that being, Killeen at that time, July 22nd, 1990. And before that, and after that, to have some insight to what did they know that was happening? Did they have some type of an inkling? Did they hear something? Did they hear a rumor from a third party? Any of that is, something that we can actually take as a lead, act on, research, try to connect the dots with it. So having them come forward and, being able to do that, they can do it anonymously. They can contact us directly with it, and we'll treat it anonymously. All of that is very, very, very precious intelligence. And I would say no detail on those leads is too small for us to understand. At least I'm not sure if you had two parts with that. I'm not sure if I hit all of the second part, but let me know if we need to go deeper.
Yeah, I think you did. I think it's the encouragement. We have experienced this in one of the more recent unsolved murders that we have been supporting a family through is this particular case was closed within about a year of the homicide happening. And that was a little bit shocking to us with no arrests and nothing like that. But now that we're bringing it back to the community, people are coming forward. I had a person call me and say, I don't know if this matters, blah, 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 blah. And I said, look, we don't know what matters. It might not, but thank you for putting it out there. And are you comfortable sharing it? Or would you like me to pass this message along? And this person passed along, and I know for a fact has been interviewed for the first time in relation to this case. And it's because we're putting it out there. The family's partnering with us, and we're putting it into the community.
That's great. I'd say that's a perfect example of kind of answering on your point number two, because let's be frank. I mean, we know that obviously the answer is out there. Something happened that night that involved other individuals and other events and other activities, and we're going through the process to discover and connect and identify and do further analysis and connection. So any additional input that we have as far as parties that may have a little bit more insight in one area is going to be very helpful. And we'll get there one way or another, but we'll get there faster with parties, helping us by stepping up and sharing what they know. And again, I know in a lot of cases there's, can be reluctance to not getting involved or feeling like they're going to get, drug into a law enforcement action on something. And I think my message to those people would be just, think about it, do the right thing, and know that by sharing that information, you're going to help bring closure for the family. You're going to help bring the answers that are needed, and set aside your concerns about, getting yourself pulled into something more than you might be thinking about. It's really your, obligation to another human being to be able to share that information. I think most people know that. I think it's just easy to not think about it and kind of let time move forward.
We've also had the opposite problem where we've actually had an investigator, tell us that, he wants us to stop talking because, you're bringing in all these people and then I'm having to follow up on all these leads that are useless. And of course, my comment was, well, how do you know they're useless? If you're not following up on them. So I don't really care that you think that, because I'm representing the family in this case. And yeah, we might go through 10 or 15 leads that don't pan out, but it's just that one that's out there that might actually break the case.
Yeah, I completely agree with your sentiment on that, better to have more intelligence to work with and then do your job to analyze it and figure it out. And because it just takes one, takes one of the right pieces of information to kind of break stuff open again, send us down the path, corroborate something that, was maybe the strength of the lead previously, or the connection or the assumption. Maybe it just wasn't as strong as we needed it to be, but that one piece of information that comes in helps get it there, and then opens another door and another door.
Yeah, I was like, I'm sorry you have to get out behind your desk, but I'd like to know what happened to this person.
Exactly.
So that's how I looked at it.
Mm-hmm. So if there's one thing that you want listeners to remember about Deanna's case, what would it be?
That if you're listening to this and you're thinking about it, how you may have been close to it and can help, that it is, this may sound very, just trite, that it's solvable, that the answer's out there, that the family is, has been and is showing up, that people care about her to date, and that we can get there with, kind of the global village of people's help, people stepping in and being able to, again, think about what you may know. If it's a party that's listening to this and they're not connected in any way they don't know, I think it's just, obviously carry that sentiment forward to any area where they can help. But, being able to be engaged, be able to support and provide any information that, is really, really what we asked for on this, Lisa.
You've been listening to Tragedy, a true crime podcast. Our purpose is to honor victims by sharing their stories through the voices of friends, family, and those whose lives were forever changed. If today's episode resonated with you, we encourage you to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast so these important stories continue to be heard. Together, we can preserve their memories and ensure their voices are never forgotten. If you have ideas for cases we should cover or questions about what you heard, you can connect with us through our Facebook group, Tragedy, a True Crime Podcast, on X @Tragedy Podcast, by email at tragedyaTrueCrimePodcast@gmail.com, or by visiting our website, www.tragedyaTrueCrimePodcast.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope you'll join us next time.